Good morning. Welcome to our online sermon content platform. My name is Patrick Larsson. I'm the Associate and Worship Pastor here at Myrtle Point First Christian Church. I'm very thankful you decided to join us on our online video sermon series. We're continuing in the book of Song of Songs as we have for the last 6 weeks. This is week 7. Next week is our final week in the Song of Songs, and Pastor Logue will be bringing that next week. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick look at what we'll be doing for the next few weeks as our local and national situation unfolds. Despite the fact that we can't meet regularly here on Sunday mornings in the church, you and I are still the church. We are the body of Christ, and we're still going to be supporting each other and trying to build each other up through whatever happens in these next several weeks. So I would like to encourage you to please keep the local and national situation in your prayers as we continue on and continue to be the church and serve others in whatever capacity we can, despite the fact that we can't physically meet together as the body of Christ on Sunday morning as of right now. We'll be really looking forward to having you back in our church building when we can. But as for right now, please come back to this online website, whether that's Facebook or YouTube or our website, to see our weekly sermon series that we'll have going on for the next several weeks. So. As we continue in Song of Songs, chapter 7, I'm going to start off with a word of prayer, and then I'll give you a little bit of context into the book, especially if you haven't joined with us yet. If you haven't heard any of these previous sermons, I'll give you some context so you know what we're talking about, and then we'll break down our passage into 3 sections and go through it verse by verse. So please bow your heads and join with me for a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we have to come before you in our own homes, but gathered together as a group still, because we know that we are the church. We are your church, God, and I pray that this is lifting up. I pray that I build somebody up with this message, but because they're your words, not mine. Please speak through me and speak the words that you want to say through this message. Thank you for your word, and thank you most of all for your Son, Jesus. It's in his name that I pray. Amen. Alright, as we come into Song of Songs chapter 7, I'm going to give you a quick thumbnail overview of the last 6 chapters of the book. Song of Songs, for those of you who don't know, is probably the most sexually explicit book in the Bible. And I don't know if that's supposed to excite you or make you a little bit afraid, but either way, I just want to give you that heads up so you know what you're getting yourself into here. If you haven't watched the last 6 sermons, I'd encourage you to go to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, or our website and watch those 6 sermons first, because that would give you some insight into what we're talking about here today. But if you want the thumbnail description, here it is. In Song of Songs chapters 1 and 2, we saw a shepherd and a shepherdess come together in a dating relationship, and they decided that they wanted to pursue that dating relationship and become husband and wife. And so we saw at the end of chapter 3 that they were wed. They became married at the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4, we see them engaging in physical intimacy with each other. And again, it is a very sexually explicit book. I'd encourage you to go ahead and read it for yourself at the very least as we come to chapter 7. At chapter 5, we saw them have a little bit of a conflict, a little bit of disagreement, as the husband might have come home from work. The wife was slow to get up and greet her husband at the door and unlock it and let him in. The husband turned away, and there was a sharp area of disagreement here and a sharp conflict, as the husband might have thought that the wife didn't want him, and the wife might have thought that the husband didn't wait long enough. And so as they came back together in chapter 6, we saw their friends, who are actually the third main character, if I may, the third main character of the book. Their friends were cheering them on, and they have been through the entire book. And we learned in chapter 6 that we need to surround ourselves with friends who will cheer our relationship on and cheer it on in order to see it succeed, and do everything they can to support us in that. And so that's where we are right now in the book of Song of Songs as we jump into chapter 7 here. And I'll encourage you to pick up your own Bible and follow along with me as we go through chapter 7 and see what God has to say to us. I believe there's a very important principle in this chapter that we can apply to every one of our relationships, whether that's our marital relationship or our friendships. And if we don't apply this principle, I do not think our relationships will be as blessed. I do not think my relationships would be as blessed as if I had gone about it God's way. So let's jump into Song of Songs, chapter 7, starting in verse 1. We're going to break it up into 3 sections. The first section is verses 1 through 5. He is speaking. How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter. Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of an artist's hands. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. Your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are the pools of Heshbon by the gate of Bath-rabbim. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, looking toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. Your hair is like royal tapestry. The king is held captive by its tresses. All right, as we come into chapter 7 here, again, he is speaking. The shepherd himself is speaking. And as we've seen the shepherd and his wife come back together, it is very obvious by this language that the shepherdess, his wife, is unclothed, fully unclothed here. It's very descriptive language. And this language is used nowhere else, actually. A language this descriptive. We have seen similar language to this, specifically in chapters 4 and I think just chapter 4, actually. But we've seen similar language to this. But in chapter 7, we see some of the most descriptive language in the entire Song of Songs and in the entire book of the Bible, to be completely frank. As we look here, he's looking at her and he's saying how beautiful you are. And her sandals on her feet, enhance the natural beauty that he sees in her feet. And he goes up and he says, I cannot imagine that anybody but the finest artist would have put you together. And this is actually true. As we can see that God has created her, God has created all of us, and he just looks at her and says, what a masterpiece you are that God has put together. As he continues, and he says the wheat that he mentions in verse 2, your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. That could mean that that's the color of her skin. We already know that she has dark skin from previous chapters. She's been out in the sun. She works very hard as a shepherdess, and she has felt the effects of the sun on her skin. So she has a darker complexion already, but another possible interpretation of this could be that the wheat is symbolic of how she satisfies him as part of their relationship. I mean, he's satisfied by her. He's not trying to go find satisfaction elsewhere, and I think that's very important for us to remember as we look at this husband and wife together in this passage. We've actually seen verse 3 before. This is copied verbatim from chapter 4, verse 5. He says the same thing in chapter 4 as he gazes on her and notes how beautiful she is and how beautiful this person is in front of him that God has created. There's some historical landmarks that he mentions in verses 4 and 5, notably the pools of Heshbon, the gate of Bath-rabbim, the Tower of Lebanon, and Mount Carmel. So each of these historical landmarks or places have they're very significant to the Old Testament people. The pools of Heshbon, well, Heshbon was actually a historical city, and it was well known for its pools of water. And as you looked at a pool of water with a very carefully maintained area around it, it looks beautiful. And you can see the reflection of the sun and the sky and everything else in it. And I can only imagine what that would have looked like. But to him, he just compares her to that. It is a beautiful scene. It's a majestic scenery right there. And the gate of Bath-rabbim was part of the historical city. And Bath-rabbim literally means gate of the daughter of nobles, or gate of daughters of nobles. And he's comparing her, as we've seen previously, to royalty, as we'll see again as we go through here. But in mentioning this before, we noted that this is merely a metaphorical description. She's not actually royalty, but what she is to him, she is royalty to him. It's sort of a pet name, like princess, love, my love, babe, something like that. Similar to what you might call your husband, wife, or significant other in your own relationship. The Tower of Lebanon was a very symmetrical construct, and it was known for that. It was known for being symmetrical and having a pleasing appearance to the eye. And so when he compares her nose to the Tower of Lebanon, he's not saying that she has a big nose, but he is in fact saying that her nose, it is pleasing to look at, and it adds a degree of beauty and symmetry to her face, as well as being known as a mark of beauty, a mark of dignity. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. here in verse 5. Your hair is like royal tapestry, and the king is held captive by its tresses. Now, I'm reading out of the New International Version this morning, but if you're reading from a different version, then you might see your hair, something about purple hair, some things to that effect, or how her hair was colored purple, or how cloth on her hair was covered purple. And I'll mention that historically, especially in Old Testament times and even through the New Testament, purple was known as a color of royalty. You wouldn't be wearing purple unless you were wealthy, unless you had high social status, and that was easily obtainable for you. And so purple here is a mark of it's a mark of royalty. Again, it's the same concept as calling her his princess, as we saw here in verse 4, when he compares her to the gate of the daughters of nobles, or the gate of Bath-Rabbim. So I just wanted to point out those few historical notes as we continue here in Song of Songs chapter 7. So let's go ahead and pick up our story here in verse 6 through 9. And again, he is still speaking, but she will add one phrase at the very end of this short section. So verse 6. How beautiful you are, and how pleasing, my love, with your delights. Your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like clusters of fruit. I said, I will climb the palm tree. I will take hold of its fruit. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. She, may the wine go straight to my beloved, flowing gently over lips and teeth. Okay, this is a continuation of the same descriptive language that we saw here at the beginning of chapter 7. And again, I'll point out, this descriptive language isn't seen anywhere else in the book of Song of Songs. Not to this, or Song of Songs, excuse me, not to this degree at least. And this language is a note of how much he loves her, how deeply he's committed to her, and how much he cares for her. It's maybe a little bit too descriptive for our Western culture, but in this time, that was normal. That sort of description was normal to describe how much he deeply cares for this woman. He deeply cares for his wife. The metaphor he uses in verses 7 and 8, where he says, your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like clusters of fruit. And he says, I will climb the palm tree, and I will take hold of its fruit. That metaphor's meaning is unmistakable. They are engaging in physical intimacy once more, as we've seen previously after they got married, and now they're engaging in it once again. This is one of those marital privileges that they get to enjoy together. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. Fruit. The usage of fruit in this passage is an indicator of pleasure. It's a reference to pleasure, especially in their culture as well, and specifically just the grapes and the apples here. And she is pleasing to him. She satisfies him, as we've seen at the beginning of this chapter, and he is held captive by this beautiful woman that's in front of him. And now she starts speaking here at the end of verse 9 and says, may the wine go straight to my beloved, flowing gently over lips and teeth. I'd like to point out at this point in the passage that this desire that the husband has for his wife is reciprocated. She also desires him. And that's very important to note as we continue reading this passage, especially in light of today's culture, in light of all the events that surround unwilling sexual interactions. It's very important to note that this desire is reciprocated. She wants him, and he wants her. They both want to be as close to each other as they possibly can. He's not trying to force himself on her, but she willingly engages in this physical intimacy. So I really wanted to point that out at this point in the passage. Again, this physical intimacy, they're close to each other. They've come back together now, and it's a beautiful thing to see how God's design for marriage plays out throughout this chapter. We're going to continue reading in chapter 7, verse 10, and this will be the last section in this chapter before we jump to what this passage means for us today. So let's pick up in verse 10 together. She is speaking. I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. Let us go early to the vineyards to see if the vines have budded. if their blossoms have opened, and if the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes send out their fragrance, and at our door is every delicacy, both new and old, that I have stored up for you, my beloved. All right. That's the end of Song of Songs chapter 7. Let's break this section down. At the beginning here, in verse 10, where she says, I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. That state of mutual belonging where they belong to each other. It's like me saying, I'm my wife's husband. My wife is mine, and we exist in that mutual state of belonging to one another. Verse 10 is an extremely poetic way of describing that state of mutual belonging. It's absolutely beautiful the way God designed marriage to work here. Verses 11 and 12 are probably the most explicit way that she has invited him into her, really, that she has invited him to come engage in physical intimacy with her, in that sexual relation with her. And that's a very important part of their marriage, as they come together and enjoy that closeness together. Again, fruit here with verse 12, pomegranates, and also verse 13 with mandrakes. It's a symbolic of the pleasure that they're engaging with each other. I'll take a minute here and explain what a mandrake is. It's a plant that we don't really see very often in our culture, at least. That the root of this plant was shaped like human genitalia and was often associated with sexual pleasure and thought to be some sort of sexual stimulant. So mandrakes and the sexual relation aspect of marriage often went hand in hand in this culture, and you'll find mandrakes used in a similar context throughout the rest of the Bible. At our door is every delicacy, both new and old, that I have stored up for you, my beloved. As this couple continues to grow in their marriage with each other and in their relationship with each other, they get to experience the joys that marriage brings. They get to be there with each other through the hard times as well, but they get to experience new things together and old things together, like raising children. I can only imagine what a joy raising children will be most of the time. As we see this chapter come to a close, it's really amazing to see again how God's design for marriage has worked right here as they come back together after this conflict and come together once again in physical intimacy. And as they continue on in their marriage next week, we get to talk about what that means for their future. So I wanted to break it down and talk about what this means, what this passage means for us today. As we've seen again, they've come back together after a period of conflict. I think that's very important to realize what this passage has for us today. You see, without this timeline, this may not mean quite as much. But in order for there to once again be physical intimacy after conflict, there has to be a very specific element of the relationship at play. And I think that element is having grace with each other, having the ability and the willingness to even forgive each other for what they did wrong, for what each spouse did wrong here in this situation. As I'll recall that real quickly in chapter 5 again. He didn't wait very long for her to get up and open the door, and she was not quick to get up and open the door for her husband. And that's only an element of the transgression that occurred between the two. But being quick to forgive is a very important part of this relationship. And if they were not quick to forgive, I want just think about how this story would have played out differently. You know, how could this have ended? If the husband was not truly satisfied by his wife, how would this have ended? This could have ended with, well, she doesn't really want me, so I'm just going to go out and find somebody who does, and who I am also satisfied by. That's not how the story ended, but think about it. If the husband had not decided to forgive his wife, and the wife had not decided to forgive her husband, this story would have ended as a relationship that had been broken because of the sin of imperfect people. And I want to point out that that's not only true for marriages, but that's also true for friendships. You know, just as sexual intimacy can be a barometer of the healthiness of a marital relationship, emphasizing the marital aspect of that relationship. But there are other things too that are healthy barometers of a marital relationship, such as good communication, being willing to spend time with each other, not even just spending time with each other, but being willing to, and even how one spouse talks about the other behind the other spouse's back. Is it a positive or a negative comment that one spouse might make about the other? And so those can also be good barometers, but I think those are also good barometers of a healthy friendship between friends. Even considering if I have a broken relationship with my friend, I should do everything in my power that I can to bring that relationship back together. And that, in order to bring that relationship back together, there must be forgiveness, there must be grace. And so that aspect applies to both marriage and friendships. And so I really think that's the heart of this passage right here. As they come back together from being estranged due to a conflict, they come back together in physical intimacy. And I think that's really important as we look at our own relationships today and see how broken we truly are because of our own sin, how broken I am because of my own sin. I can only tell you how many times forgiveness has begun to play a very important part in my own marriage. Both more my wife forgiving me than me forgiving my wife, let's be real. But at the same time, we have to come into relationships, marital and friendships, we must be willing to forgive. And if we are not willing to forgive, Jesus says that God will not forgive us for our own sins. At the same time, though, we need to be ready to be forgiven. If we're not ready to be forgiven in our hearts, and we just expect that our spouse or our friend is going to forever hold that grudge against us for whatever it was we did, then I think we're coming about this the wrong way. And I don't think that's I don't believe that is God's design for marriage or for friendships. So I want to challenge you this week as we go about being quarantined and other things, as we can't publicly meet together, but I want to challenge you. Think of relationships that you might have that are broken. And if you don't have any broken relationships, that's great. More power to you, because I don't know how you're doing it. I just want to encourage you, though. Find those relationships, seek them out, and seek forgiveness, whether that means you forgiving them or them forgiving you. Because if we do it that way, that is God's design for relationships, both marriage and friendships. I really want to encourage us to seek grace and be ready to be forgiven and be ready to forgive others. So that's all that I have for the sermon today. I want to encourage you again to come back here next week. Come back to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and to our website to find our next weekly sermon as Pastor Lloyd finishes out a Song of Songs with chapter 8, and we come into our Palm Sunday and Easter time. I also wanted to mention we have Christopher Lapel in town this weekend, and Lloyd actually has an interview with him tonight. If you want to come back here to this, to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our website, that interview will be posted here later this evening. So I really want to encourage you to come back here and tune in for that, because it's going to be really good as we hear Christopher Lapel's story, which is it's very powerful as this missionary in Cambodia strives to do the Lord's work. So thank you for tuning in right now. I pray that you will continue to be the church, both at home, while you're in quarantine, and abroad, whether that means a trip to the grocery store or just driving on your way to wherever it is you need to be. So I'll take a moment and pray for you, and I will hope to see you again here very soon. Father, thank you for forgiving us when we know we didn't deserve it. I pray that you would extend that same forgiveness to us so that we may extend it to others. I pray that we are ready to forgive and ready to be forgiven this week throughout whatever it is that we have going on. I pray that you would keep us safe and keep us healthy. And I pray that you would give us opportunities to serve, and that we would take hold of that and be diligent in doing your work and being in the Word for you. Thank you for your Son, Jesus, and for the opportunity that we have to be in your Word this morning. I want to thank you for everything you do for us every day, and for the many blessings you give us. And it's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.